Welcome to Lead and Follow, a podcast that explores how great collaboration actually happens. I'm your host, Sharna Fabiano, author of the book Lead and Follow, The Dance of Inspired Teamwork. And I'm pleased to bring you the latest research, insights, and learning methods to help you work together better with the people around you. I help founders, solopreneurs, and new leaders become great at collaborating because I've seen how much more becomes possible when people integrate their ideas, perspectives, and strengths in a practical way. To learn more about coaching with me and for a one-time discount on your first session, go to sharnafabiano.com/coaching and enter the promo code podcast. The link is in the show notes. And now, here's the episode. Today I'm talking with Pedro Portela, a complex systems thinking coach and a self-described network enthusiast living in Portugal. An engineer by training, Pedro is now a freelance consultant for peacebuilding and conflict transformation. And, among many other things, he's also a tango dancer. I am really thrilled that Pedro has agreed to chat with me today because he's been exploring several areas that I really aspire to learn a lot more about. So this episode is going to be a real treat for me, and I'm sure it will be for you as well. Pedro, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Sharna. I'm really delighted to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation.
You're so welcome. Now, I want to jump in maybe just to satisfy my own curiosity, but I think it'll be fascinating for listeners as well. Would you just share a little bit about how you found your way into systems thinking and the study of networks?
The origin story.
Yes, totally.
So I ever since I can remember, I was always fascinated with science, with science fiction. I was a huge science fiction fan. But at the same time, also interested in philosophy and all these very big questions of mankind. I decided to study engineering. So I'm an engineer by training, a mechanical engineer by training, and I actually started. My first career steps were in aerospace engineering, and I helped found a company in aerospace engineering. And I always loved systems engineering. So learning about how complicated projects or how complicated spacecrafts are assembled together, many disciplines coming together to produce a very complicated product. And I'm using the word complicated and not complex on purpose. So as a project manager and as a company manager as well, I found myself getting more involved in the human dynamics of building complicated machines and complicated projects. And I got myself more and more interested in the human aspects of building the projects rather than the technical aspects, because it turns out I'm a lousy engineer. But I think I was a good project manager and I was a good team player. So eventually I decided to leave that company because of a governance issue. In hindsight, I can see it. It was a governance issue. It was due to different understandings of how to organize a team and how to structure power in the team. Given that we were working with complicated projects, some of them becoming complex once you introduce the human factor into it.
Yeah, maybe at some point you can distinguish those two for us.
Yeah, I mean, sending a robot to Mars is a very complicated endeavor. So you need a lot of expertise, you need a lot of experts, and you need a lot of effort in building the parts and making sure that they run together. But it's a linear process. So you just, big air quotes here, you're just assembling parts together. and this is what I would call a very complicated project.
Okay.
When you start introducing human beings and uncertainty and facing phenomenon which are emergent, meaning that they cannot be explained by the sum of its parts, then you start entering the realm of complexity. And so what I used to say is that an airplane is a very complicated machine, but it's not a complex machine. Once you put a human in the controls, it starts getting complex. And so all our efforts as engineers, and especially as aerospace engineers, was to reduce the complexity as much as possible, trying to make a complex endeavor into a complicated one, which we can control. And we've been very successful at it in the aerospace sector.
Thank you. That's really helpful, actually. I appreciate that. I think it'll set us up for the rest of the conversation too.
Sure. And so, as I was saying, I left that company, and I decided to take a year off to go and read, because this is something that I hadn't done in a while. I went to Schumacher College in the UK, which is this very alternative school for sustainability and climate change, Gaia theory and the sorts. And that's where I started to hear about systems thinking and systems science. And of course, as an engineer who was passionate about systems engineering, I thought, there's something very interesting. And down the rabbit hole I went. I started doing some pro bono work for local organizations, local associations. When I started then reading about network science and network theory as related to understanding complex systems, that's when I thought that here's something that I can work with as an engineer, like creating network analysis models, network dynamics models, and really trying to make all of these insights from complexity and network science into actionable tools and stuff that activists and civil society could use to enhance their efforts in social change and environmental change.
Now I want to go down the rabbit hole with you. It sounds super fascinating. And when you were describing the difference between complicated and complex, all sorts of little bells went off on my head because of, as you know, and as listeners know, I am a lead and follow fanatic, and I'm fascinated by the sort of dynamic relationship, which in many ways I think is a complex relationship, because when you put lead and follow together, especially, in a form like Tango where you can see it, you get an emergent result. Like you don't know necessarily what's gonna happen. I wonder if you could maybe define network for listeners, as you study it.
The most fundamental way to talk about networks is networks are a set of nodes and their connections between nodes. We're surrounded by networks. In fact, current thinking talks about us living in a networks of networks. Your brain is a network. Your brain is a network of neurons connected with each other. Air travel is a bunch of airports connected by airplanes, and society is a huge social network, a set of individuals connected by relationships. Now we can ask, so what are these relationships? And this is where we go down yet another rabbit hole in defining what are these relationships. I usually talk about systems and networks interchangeably, because systems are networks,
Right, that makes sense.
And what fascinated me about the network science is that there is this whole body of knowledge that tries to conceptualize networks in a way that mathematics can deal with it. You can abstract a society almost as a network of nodes and the relationships between them, and understand how they're structured, how the network structure affects whatever the network is doing.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm already learning so much. I'm going to ask the silly question, making a bit of an assumption here, but maybe you can help me clarify it. So, okay, everything's a network, right? Everything's a system. So I'm imagining that by understanding any given network, that allows us to maybe impact what that system is generating or what the current reality-based outcomes are. Would that be a correct assumption, or am I kind of oversimplifying?
We human beings, we work on models. We don't work on reality. We work on models of reality. We work on abstractions of the real world. We can even debate whether what we're seeing and what we are, perceiving is actual reality, but a model which our mind uses to make sense and to create and make meaning of reality. And so networks I see as another model. Now, there's this famous adage that all models are wrong, some are useful, right? Networks for me is like the latest iteration of these models of reality, which allows us to understand a little bit better how reality works. And I'm especially concerned, or I'm especially interested in social phenomenon, how social reality actually works. So if you have a better model, how can we use that model to create conditions for things to happen or things to evolve in a certain way? Because, and this is how network thinking or network science connects to complexity and the lessons of complexity science. So if you accept that you're working on a complex system, you can't really talk about predictability or about steering a system in a complex system in a given direction, but you can create some rules or create some boundaries or create the conditions to increase the likelihood that it will evolve into a specific direction. And you can see this on the dance floor as well. So I actually use tango and the tango analysis on my trainings.
Yeah, I know as you're describing that, I actually was visualizing a dance floor. I'm thinking, okay, yeah, we don't know what's going to happen out there, but we can set some conditions, go around in one direction. Here's, your common language, so to speak, to kind of shift it in a direction of harmony, or hope that the conditions arise for everyone to have a peaceful, joyful experience.
Yeah, it's about the pattern. So you can have the same group of people in the same room dancing to the same music twice, and you will never get the same format of the dance. You will get a completely different one. But it's still tango. It's still the same music, and you will probably have couples going around the room, but it's never going to be the same experience.
I want to read this beautiful sentence he wrote in one of your articles, and then perhaps you can use dance to give us a more of an example of how this works. Quote, "Tango is an emulator of a complex adaptive system. While you're dancing it, you practice with your mind and body all the skills necessary to act in an uncertain and complex world." Of course, I'm a dancer too, so I love that my practice is equipping me with all these skills that I didn't even know I had. And of course, the listeners know I wrote a whole book about what I learned about tango and how that applies to relationships. So I'd love for you to just speak a little more about how you see the dance floor and maybe, use this as an example for us.
I rediscovered the connection between tango and complex systems when something dawned on me while I was researching and studying about complex systems, which is if you want to be consistent and coherent with the lessons of complex systems and complexity science teaches you, you have to throw away command and control and prediction, which is basically everything our modern society is based on, right? And everything, it's not only societal; it's deeply ingrained in our psyche. We long for control. We long for prediction. Everything else causes us anxiety and stress. And the past couple of years have been nothing but anxiety and stress and uncertainty. So it's like if life is telling us, guys, you have to deal with this. You have to deal with it because this is what life is. Yeah. And so how do we reconcile these two? So how do we reconcile our need for control, for predictability with the fact that life is uncertain, complex, and ambiguous? And this is where I find these practices like tango. For me, tango is a practice. It's a mindfulness practice. When you're dancing, you're practicing everything that you need to be in the now while enjoying yourself,
Hopefully.
And it's not like martial arts. I also did martial arts, and martial arts had the same a similar lesson to learn, except that in martial arts, if you don't pay close attention to what you're doing, if you're not present, you get punched in the face. So, which is also a good way to to wake yourself up. In tango, it's if you practice being in the now, practice being in connection, practice being aware of what is around you, but not lose focus, being in the flow, you will actually have a very blissful experience. So it's not all chaotic. There is some order, and you just need to learn how to practice your ability to live, to turn that apparent chaos into blissful order. And this is something that this is not, of course, yeah, you need to learn there is some technicalities in it, but it's a state of mind. And for me, like living in complex adaptive systems with complexity and uncertainty, it's a state of mind. And stuff like tango puts you in that place of mind, I feel.
Yeah, no, beautifully said. And thank you for satisfying my curiosity through that network of topics. At the risk of adding another topic, I just want to, because I know you're a tango dancer and a martial artist, when you reflect on the ideas of leading and following, I wonder what you see in terms of, a complex system or a network. Like, do those things come into the dynamic in that frame, or would you say it a different way?
We need to talk about power, because a lot of what is being exchanged in social networks is about power. I mean, and we don't need to talk about oppressive power or manipulative power. It can be soft power, right? It can be our ability to mobilize someone towards a specific, goal, which can be positive, which can be negative, and that happens in lead and follow relationships. My intentional choice to follow somebody's voice, somebody's mission, and the combination of these choices is what makes society work. The reason I am so interested in the whole followership conversation or movement is that I think we tend to forget how much intention there is in our followership decision, and how much power we have by choosing to follow and reflecting on what it is that I want to, or who is it that I want to follow. We tend to be blocked in this idea that everyone needs to lead, while actually everyone needs to be more in touch with what it is that they want to follow. I mean, social networks, and by the way, when I say social networks, I don't mean digital social networks. I mean the actual, physical human relationships. There is always a lead and followership dynamics taking place.
Yeah, I also, of course, I'm a strong advocate of more following and more like consciousness of how and who and when we're following.
For me, it's so obvious that the relationship between lead and follower, it's so out of balance in our world today. We rarely see someone or promoting his followership workshop, right? Or somebody signing up for a followership workshop. And I believe that, some of the paralysis we see in today's world and some of the frustration we see in the world today, because people feel powerless before everything that is happening around us, war, climate change, elections, polarization, or whatever. It's because we are waiting for these leaders, and we forget that we make those leaders by actively choosing to follow. You may choose to follow an idea and a dream or a myth, and that is the leader figure. It doesn't have to be a person. It can be an idea, a dream.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just give a shout out to our conversation from previous week on Pedro's podcast. I'll put a link to that in the show notes, so we'll talk about that later as well. I was having a thought as you were talking about following and how we overlook it. I wonder, do you think that the tendency to lead or to kind of focus on leadership is a little bit about control? You'd mentioned earlier that, there's this impulse for humans to want to control and predict everything, even though complexity theory tells us it's impossible, right? there is constantly an emerging reality that we need to deal with. But that tendency to want to lead, I wonder if that's a little bit about control and our reluctance to acknowledge following, or the relationship between leading and following is somehow like reflective of our aversion to the unknown, uncertainty, emergent reality. Because to acknowledge that leading and following is this sort of complex emergent dynamic, or to acknowledge that followers have influence on leaders, so they can't entirely predict what will happen, that puts you right in that space of, I don't know, right? In the moment, like, I don't know, I have to be present and aware. I'm just sort of brainstorming here. What do you think of that?
I may have a very pessimistic perspective on this, because I think we've lost a little bit we're addicted to control. And this goes back to the Enlightenment and to the scientific revolution.
Sure.
And we went all in.
All in on control.
All in on control in every aspect of human existence. All in. To the point that we've lost the collective memory on how to live life differently other than command and control. Okay, there are hints that it is not lost. In fact, you can see remnants of it in very young children. Very young children. And I was fortunate to be able to follow my daughter, witness her birth, and follow her all the way to she's now 2.5 years old, and accompany the process of how a human being starts making sense of the world. We're actually almost biologically programmed to understand systems and to understand complexity, and our brain is almost hardwired to work with complex adaptive systems, and it makes perfect sense because we've always been surrounded by them. But we lose it once we go to school. No, really.
Yeah, no,
seriously,
I'm laughing because it's sort of like laugh or cry,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know the situation there in the US, but at least here, public schools are all about command and control. You sit in a room, you listen to somebody that is telling you what to do.
Yeah.
Right? From very, very, very young age. And, that's what you were exposed to until you're out of college. And once you're out of college, you go to the workplace, and that's exactly the same kind of dynamics that you get. And the narrative behind our, academic curriculum, it's about control.
Yeah.
Right? Especially in the hard sciences, engineering, maths, and it's about control. It's finding more and more expertise in more and more fields, and being the expert in that field in order to control that field. Absolutely.
I think it's very insightful what you're saying, and I so appreciate the way you're widening the scope of our perspective, really expanding the view of where we can see this control pattern active across multiple aspects of our social existence together. And for me, I can definitely see all that you're describing in my own earliest memories of school and work and just general life. And I think in my way of thinking, I would term this whole thing a leader-centric paradigm.
Yeah.
And I want to be clear that leading is not a bad thing, right? We want leadership to exist, but when we focus on it by itself, if it's leading only, then we have no awareness of followership or followers or the influence of followers or other people on the leader. That's when we automatically slide into this command and control paradigm. At least that's how I see it happening.
Yeah.
And when we're in that leader-centric paradigm, it's inherently dysfunctional, at least to some degree, precisely because it's disconnected from those who are being led, right, from everybody else, from the follower side. But as soon as you then add following and followership back into the equation, in other words, as soon as you put the act of leading in dialogue with the act of following, then instantly the whole thing changes.
Exactly.
Leadership then almost cannot mean command and control, because just like in a dance, every choice you make then results in a response from the other side. And so the outcome is emergent and not predetermined. I wonder what your thoughts are on the connection between the command control paradigm and this excessive emphasis on leadership that we seem to have.
Sometimes it makes sense to command and control. It makes sense to command and control an airplane, right? It doesn't make sense to command and control a phenomenon which is emergent, which is ever dynamic. And we've seen hints of this over the past 2 years during the pandemic. You can become a leader and not being necessarily in control. You can be you can become a leader because of the space you host or the space you create for your followers to step in and to take charge.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent point. I really appreciate the decoupling, right? Those two concepts that, yes, in certain contexts, it might make sense for a person in a position of leadership, right, to command and control, say, an airplane. But to limit the role of leader to that is like so extremely narrow and, non-productive and counterproductive, in many ways. Pedro, I want to shift a little bit and make sure we have some time to talk about your most recent work in peacebuilding, because I'm super fascinated by that. And I think it might, just give listeners a little more of a view into how you concretize some of this incredible research that you've done. You've been doing some work in South Sudan. Can you give us a little orientation to that project? And then we'll kind of go from there.
I've been working as a consultant for US-based philanthropy on a peacebuilding and conflict transformation initiative in South Sudan. It's really not a project because we're not projecting, we're not throwing anything into the future other than our commitment to accompany this group of currently 24 South Sudanese men and women of less than 40 years old, a generation which will become the leaders of the country if they manage to get their followership right. So we call it peace building, but it's actually about accompanying people who have incredible life stories, all of them, who have been through a lot in their lives, who have a lot to teach me about complex systems and thriving and surviving in the midst of chaos and uncertainty. So I've learned a lot from them. Actually, one of my first ahas when I met them was, I'm not here to teach anything about being in a network or working in networks to people who survive a civil war. Because if you do survive a civil war, you have the PhD in complex systems and networks. So we were accompanying them on this journey of becoming this network of young South Sudanese peace builders. They're coming from different tribes and ethnicities, very different backgrounds. We have civil society members, we have engineers, we have doctors, we have NGO staff, and they're actively choosing to be together differently. And this is what I find extremely promising, not only for South Sudan, but for the whole world, because they're addressing the issues that are pressing for all of our societies today, which is how do we overcome polarization? How do we overcome the us versus them? How do we overcome our trauma? How do we, and this is a quote from our senior fellow at HU, John Paul Lederach, how do we imagine living and sharing the life in an interdependent relationships with people who probably hate us or who were responsible for doing a lot of harm to us back in the days when the war was raging. And this moral imagination, which is the title of John Paul's book, is exactly what the world needs right now. And so every single day or every time I spend with my South Sudanese colleagues, I get reminded of how much of what they're trying to do over there could percolate to the rest of our lives and to the rest of our societies and to the rest of our world.
Yeah.
If you subtract the context, which is of course extremely different, the human dynamics at play are the same in Portugal, are the same in Europe, in Ukraine, in the US.
Yeah, it sounds like they're really co-creating, or you are co-creating a new model, as you mentioned earlier. And what we so often need is just like a different model, right, to live in complexity.
Yeah, and we need to try it out. We need to be honest in our attempt, at, which means that we will fail most of the times, but that's okay. As long as we stick to the commitment that we will learn. We're doing this because we want to learn, not because, and that's why I refrain from using the word project, because project implies an end, and there is no end to this. There will be an end to our engagement and our support. That's clear, but there is no end to this process of learning how to be together, which steers us away from violence, from conflict, from polarization.
Yeah, right. We don't want there to be an end to that, right? We want to continue improvising, right, how to be together, I would think.
Yeah, it will never come to an end. The quest for peace is the ultimate human endeavor.
You use the word accompanying, which is a beautiful word. And I appreciate the correction around the term project. And I'm going to examine my own language around that in future. But the word accompanying, it makes me think about following. And I don't know, I wonder if you would see it that way, or if you see any of what you're doing with this group, as following or leading or both.
Yes. Absolutely. And I've used the term followership, and I've actually done a small workshop with my colleagues on followership, just to highlight this. Because absolutely, in fact, what in this particular initiative, we are constantly reminding ourselves that we're not in the lead. We're not leading anything. If anything, we're struggling to understand what is it that this collective, that this group do together and wants to manifest together, and we're there to accompany and to support in this. And our job, and my job specifically, is to understand. So where does it make sense for me to come in? And sometimes I lead. To give you concrete examples, we're now talking about governance, decision making, and this is something that I've been advocating for. Well, we should have a conversation about this, and then this naturally emerges, and it takes the time that it takes. We don't have an agenda. It will just emerge when it emerges. And another opportunity to lead is, for example, we need to put together a document, and I can lead in the process of creating a draft with questions, that can be then iterated. And then I step back and then I follow whatever this first step leads. And this is how we, the consultants and facilitators are approaching this. Is this interplay between lead and follow? It's like if we were an orchestra. We're not the conductors. We're the people with with the bass, every now and then playing a note.
I love the bass player analogy and the orchestra analogy in general. And if I'm understanding you well here, it sounds like the work that you're doing, the peace building, as you're calling it, is actually a lot of following and sometimes leading when needed.
Yeah.
Although you mentioned that you're very intentionally not leading most of the time.
Yes, absolutely.
Which I just want to underline here for listeners, because due to our pervasive cultural bias, we tend to assume that all the power is in the leading. But you're demonstrating here that there's actually a lot of power in following, and that frequently that is the place to be, right? That we really need to devote some of our energy there to following. And so I wonder if you have any other recent examples of what that looks like in the way you're working in this group.
South Sudan is an oral society, so it's not that usual to have written documents. So this means that, especially during the pandemic years, where we weren't able to travel, to be together, and spend a week on a retreat with them, most of the interactions happen over WhatsApp, over very poor voice calls. it was really impossible sometimes for us to even do sense making. So what on earth is going on? What's happening? And there were some times where there were some minor conflicts, some stuff that needed to happen and didn't take place. And this was the point where we consciously stepped back, sat down and said, all right, relax, trust. Because there was no point in us in trying to really lead something there, because the reality is happening offline and our only channel of communication was online. So what else do you have except step into the followership role and see what see what emerges, and whatever emerges is the right thing, and you'll deal with it. It's really a mindset, and it's really a process mentality.
It's a great example, and it does really illustrate the different mindset, because I could even feel like in my own system, my own body and brain, as you're describing that difficulty in communicating. I'm like, oh, but I need to like nail it down. I need to do something and make sure we all like meet. But, that's my own tendency to control, I recognize, and what if it's okay to just wait, to just step back and recognize my desire to control is not the important thing, right? What is the bigger goal here? It's how we're being together for the, long, indefinite future. I think that is tough, like psychically, right? We have to really, it's like taking a leap of faith in a way and choosing to exist in a different frame of mind and body.
Yes. And the opportunities for self-reflection that gives, because then you're and I speak for myself, like you have to look yourself in the mirror and say, why are you being such a control freak? Totally, why do you want to see this happen so much? And it's of course good things, and you want some outcomes to come from your actions and from your agency. You want to feel agency, right? You want to feel that you have something to say, and you want to get feedback from those actions. But sometimes you don't get feedback, you have a completely different feedback, or you don't really know what is happening to something, to an idea, or to something that you've said. And why does that cause you so much frustration and anxiety and stress? What does it tell us about our own psyche and our own personality and so on? So it gets you. It gets you.
It really does. And it brings me back also to one of the things I learned from the tango community, which is, can I put the relationship first, versus like, I'm going to do this move, like, why am I so attached to that step, but all right, am I prioritizing my own like predetermined thought that this is best, or am I prioritizing the relationship itself and my experience in the relationship? And when we do that, I think both in dance and in other realms, like something different happens, something totally different happens. Pedro, I feel like we might need to have part 2 here, but I want to make sure that in this episode anyway, we point listeners toward your podcast and your work so they can learn more about what you're doing. I've listened to a few episodes already. They're fantastic, not only the one that I was in. So please tell us a little bit more about that.
So this is something I decided to do later last year. I started interviewing people who I believe have something to say about governance and about network governance or governance of collective movements, because I believe that the 21st century challenge is, how can we get our act together as a global civilization?
Great question.
And this is becoming more and more pressing with climate change and the threat of World War III. We seriously need to think and reimagine new ways of getting together. And there are some great examples out there that, of course, don't solve all of the world's problems, but they're a step towards it. And I started this podcast where I interview people like you and other community leaders and leaders of NGOs and researchers thinking and investing in governance. You can find it on now on Google Podcasts as well, and on SoundCloud.
Excellent.
It's called It Takes Two to Tango.
Thank you. Yes, that was what I was going to ask. Great. So please check out Takes Two to Tango with Pedro Portela. I'll put that link in the show notes. And I want to thank you so much. And I just want to comment here as you're describing, this huge question, right? How do we be together? It's almost like one of those magical paradoxes where in asking the question, you have to then kind of let go of your attachment to the answer, because the nature of the question puts you in this present moment reality of complexity, right? Where we have to acknowledge we don't know what the emergent thing is going to be because we have to be together differently, right? And that requires the open-ended dialogue, this willingness to follow, the willingness to step back. So I just want to encourage listeners to invite themselves, right, to kind of be in that paradox, or to consider the possibility of being with each other in a different way, right, as you're saying, and perhaps letting go a little bit of our, whatever might be in our minds and bodies in terms of thinking that we might know definitively like how it is, because simply that act of saying, I might not know yet, is the revolution, right? It is the change that puts us in the state we need to be in. Thank you so much. Any other final words here you'd like to leave listeners with?
Just one anecdote coming from tango. One of the last times I went to a milonga, I witnessed something really wonderful. It was a very small milonga. There were two couples dancing to Osvaldo Pugliese, one of my favorite composers. Mm-hmm. And one couple was a very young couple, very dynamic, going very quickly around the dance floor. In the end, and the other couple was, middle-aged, slightly older couple, and they were dancing very slowly, just walking, doing pivots and 8 figures. And when the music ended, the follower of the first couple was exhausted and clearly not really having a good time. The older couple, when the music ended, they just embraced themselves and they kissed each other. And I just found that, it doesn't have to be very, very complicated. You can dance your way through life with very, very simple steps, as long as the connection is there. You don't need to be a performer. You just need to be happy and connected to the person you're dancing with. So I found that really brilliant.
Beautiful image to end on. I feel like you've given me permission to let go of a few things, a few of my own attachments. Thank you so much. And wish you the best. I learned so much in this hour, and I look forward to our next conversation, Pedro.
Thank you, Sharna.
You have been listening to the Lead and Follow podcast. Special thanks to Glover Gill for composing our music. And a huge thank you to all of you who support the show. It really means a lot. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend or consider joining the Lead and Follow fan club for as little as $3 a month. There's a link at the bottom of the show notes.